My name is Wayne Montgomery. I am 82 years old, a retired postmaster from Omaha, Nebraska, and I live alone in the same brick bungalow where my wife Eileen and I raised our 2 children. This house, modest by modern standards, holds the echo of our lives in every creaking floorboard and every fading photograph on the walls. Eileen passed away 10 years ago, suddenly, from heart failure in the early hours of a frozen January morning. She was reaching across the kitchen counter to pour coffee when it happened. I found her slumped beside the sink, her favorite blue teacup shattered on the tile. The silence that followed her absence was unbearable. I spent weeks listening for the sound of her slippers on the floor, the hum of her low singing while she cooked, the rustle of her nightgown beside me in bed. But none of it came back. The world had shifted in that moment, and no one seemed to notice except me. For a while I tried to keep life as normal as possible. I got up every morning at 6, made the bed, prepared breakfast for 1. I still made her coffee, 3 teaspoons of grounds, 1 cup of water, and a tiny dash of cinnamon, the way she used to like it, though I never drank it. It felt like a small tribute, a ceremony for the dead that no priest could perform. I kept her clothes in the closet, laundered and hung neatly, as if she might walk through the door at any moment and ask why the hallway was so cold. But the hallway stayed cold, and the door never opened. The children came less and less. My son Brett, now 54, lives in Des Moines with his wife and 2 sons, and works in real estate. My daughter Michelle, 51, lives right here in Omaha, just a few miles away, but I might as well have been in another state. She's busy, she says, managing a local insurance office, dealing with her teenage daughters, trying to keep it all together. I understand. I do. Life gets complicated. But I couldn't help noticing how simple it seemed when they needed something from me. A loan to help Brett's eldest get into college. A contribution to Michelle's emergency fund when her husband lost his job and they were behind on mortgage payments. "Just for a couple of months, Dad," she said. "You always said Mum and you put some money away, right?" And we had. Eileen and I were careful. We lived within our means, saved what we could, skipped vacations for 40 years, just to make sure we'd never be a burden to our children. What a cruel twist, then, that they came to see us as little more than a financial reservoir to tap when the faucet ran dry. Still, I gave. Not out of obligation, but out of a hope that maybe, just maybe, giving would draw them closer. That we'd sit together at the table again, all of us. That they'd ask me how I was sleeping. That they'd bring the grandkids by not just for birthdays, but for no reason at all. But the visits never became regular. And the phone calls were brief, sterile, transactional. "Hi, Dad. How are you?" "Great. Listen, quick thing." Always a quick thing. Every December since Eileen's passing, I've prepared the house for Christmas alone. I drag the tree down from the attic, fluff its crushed branches, and string the old lights around the windows. I bake her famous molasses cookies, though mine never taste quite the same. I play Bing Crosby on the radio, not because I particularly like him, but because she did. And I leave the porch light on, just in case someone decides to drop by. Sometimes I imagine hearing car doors outside, hurried footsteps on the sidewalk, voices at the door. But it's always the wind or the neighbors or nothing at all. This past year something felt different. Lonelier, perhaps, or maybe just heavier. My knees ached more than usual, and I caught myself losing track of time. There were days when I'd sit down in the morning with my coffee and not realize until the sun set that I hadn't eaten a thing. I thought about calling Michelle and asking if she and Brett might want to come by for Christmas Eve. Maybe bring the kids, maybe just for an hour. But pride held me back. A man only wants to beg his family so many times before the silence becomes less painful than the rejection. Then, Out of the blue, I got a call from Michelle. Her voice was bright, almost forced. "Hey, Dad," she said. "Brett and I were talking and we thought, how about we do Christmas all together this year, like old times?" My heart nearly stopped. I asked her if she was sure, and she laughed, saying of course she was. "We'll come to your place," she said. "Bring the food, the kids, everything. You just relax. We've got it all covered." I thanked her, probably too many times, my voice cracking just a little. For the first time in years, I felt something warm stir in my chest. Not quite joy, but a cousin of it, a tender hope. I spent the next week cleaning the house top to bottom, pulling out the good plates Eileen had only ever used for guests, and even going to the trouble of buying new linens. I put the old tree up again, fixed the lights that no longer worked, and set up the nativity scene that had been hers since she was a child. I even ironed my best shirt and pants, not that anyone would notice, but it felt right. Christmas morning came with frost on the windows, and I sat by the living room fire waiting. They arrived late, nearly 2 hours behind. But I told myself traffic must have been awful. They came in carrying boxes and bags, talking loudly, laughing, bringing with them that boisterous chaos I had missed so much. The grandchildren barely said hello before disappearing into their phones. Michelle gave me a quick hug and said, "Merry Christmas, Dad," then turned back to her husband to discuss the schedule. Brett was grinning in that too wide way I'd seen him use on clients. Not fake, exactly, but not sincere either. He handed me a large envelope, wrapped with a bow. "We wanted to surprise you," he said. And in that moment I believed, truly believed, that maybe they had remembered. Maybe it was tickets to a ball game or a group cruise. Maybe they had planned a family weekend away, just us. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers, smiling before I even saw what was inside. Then I read it, and I stopped smiling. Inside was a one-way bus ticket to a care facility in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and a printed brochure with photos of cheerful old folks in wheelchairs, playing bingo and smiling blandly at cafeteria tables. There was a note from Michelle, handwritten in her rushed, bubbly script. "Dad, we love you and want what's best for you. This place has 24-hour care, clean rooms, and friendly staff. We thought it was time. Merry Christmas." The room spun a little. I sat back in my chair, the paper shaking in my hands. Brett was talking, saying something about how they'd arranged everything already, how they'd even packed a small bag for me and brought it in the trunk. Michelle chimed in, saying it wasn't forever, just until I got more stable, but their eyes were avoiding mine. The kids didn't look up from their screens. I looked at the envelope again, then at the tree, then at the empty place on the couch where Eileen used to sit. Something cracked inside me. Not loudly, not all at once, but like a hairline fracture deep in a foundation that had held strong for decades. I didn't speak. I didn't argue. I just folded the paper slowly, stood up, and walked toward the hallway. "Where are you going, Dad?" Michelle called after me. "I need a minute," I said quietly. And in that minute, standing alone in the room where every picture told the story of a family that no longer existed, I decided that if they thought they could quietly dispose of me like some inconvenient antique, they had underestimated the wrong man. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the radiator tick and the clock on the wall beat away the hours like a metronome of insult. Outside the window, snow fell in slow, silent sheets, blanketing the street in cold indifference. Inside, my heart felt similarly covered, not in snow, but in the frost that comes from betrayal too intimate to name. I kept replaying their words, their expressions, the glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. It hadn't been a suggestion or a conversation. It had been a decision already made, a judgment passed in absentia. And the sentence, exile from my own life. They hadn't asked if I was willing. They hadn't invited me to consider. They simply informed me that my time as an autonomous adult had expired. Michelle had said it so cheerily, like she was announcing a cruise she'd booked on my behalf. "You won't have to cook any more, Dad. They serve 3 meals a day, and the nurse said they even have music nights." Music nights. I wanted to laugh, as if I gave a damn about someone playing show tunes on an upright piano in a sanitized room that smelled of bleach and loneliness. They'd packed a suitcase for me, as if I were a child being sent to camp. I found it later, discreetly placed near the front door. 2 changes of clothes, my blood pressure pills, a razor, and my shaving kit. No books, no photos, nothing personal, nothing that indicated they thought I might return. That was when it hit me. They didn't just want me somewhere safe. They wanted me gone, out of sight, out of mind, out of their lives. A man-shaped inconvenience being quietly moved off the board. I remembered something Brett had said, almost offhandedly, as he took a second helping of ham at dinner. "The taxes on this place are brutal, you know. Big house, old wiring, not exactly cheap to maintain." He hadn't said it to me. He'd said it to Michelle, like they were talking over a spreadsheet, like I was the roof leak or the oil furnace. I was starting to see it more clearly now. This wasn't about safety or care. It was about consolidation, simplification, profit. Michelle had never hidden her distaste for this house, calling it a money pit and an energy vampire. I should have seen it coming. Around 2 a.m, I got up and made coffee. Not for the caffeine, but for the comfort of the ritual. Eileen always said the kitchen was where you think best. I sat at the table, my hands wrapped around the mug, and stared at the space across from me. Her chair. The cushion was still slightly indented, as though she had only just left. If she had been here, I imagined she would have narrowed her eyes and said something cutting. "Well, they didn't even wait for the tree lights to dim, did they?" And then, in a softer voice, "What are you going to do about it, Wayne?" It was a fair question. What was I going to do? I spent the next day in a fog. Brett and Michelle said they'd come by tomorrow afternoon to pick me up and get the paperwork handled. That word again, paperwork, like it was a rental car or a gym membership. I nodded when they told me, too tired to argue. They didn't ask if I needed help with anything. They didn't ask if I wanted to bring anything else. They just said, "Make sure you have your Medicare card and a coat." And then they left, without so much as a hug. When the door closed behind them, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was a vacuum. I sat in the armchair and didn't move for nearly an hour. I watched the snow pile up outside. A part of me wanted to let it happen, to just go along, shuffle quietly into that institutional ending they had prepared for me. I'd seen the place online, the one in Cedar Rapids. It was clean, yes, and functional, but it was also a waiting room for death. Fluorescent lights, plastic mattresses, shared bathrooms, and a front desk clerk who wouldn't know the name of your first pet or the way you like your eggs. I thought about my tools in the basement, my photo albums in the attic, the letters Eileen had written me over the years. They were all still here. Would they throw it all out? Keep it? Sell the house before spring? The more I thought about it, the more a slow-burning anger began to rise. Not the hot, explosive kind. I was too old and too tired for that. No, this was something deeper, a settling of moral weight in the gut, a realization. They had forgotten who I was. They thought my age had stripped me of memory, of awareness, of will. But I remembered plenty. I remembered when Michelle had broken her wrist falling off her bike, and I had carried her 1/2 mile to the hospital. I remembered when Brett had his first panic attack before college finals, and I sat with him all night, telling him stories from the war to keep him calm. I remembered every night Eileen and I stayed up talking about our hopes for them, how we wanted them to grow into kind, decent people who'd never feel abandoned in this world. Had we failed? I sat there, clutching the mug, until the sun came up. And then I knew, if this was to be my last Christmas in this house, then it would not end the way they planned. They wanted to hand me an ending. But I had one more chapter to write. I wouldn't let them close the book on me. Not like this. That morning, I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Frank Detweiler, an old army buddy turned estate lawyer, who still owed me for covering his tale in Busan during the summer of '52. He picked up on the second ring. "Montgomery," he said, half in disbelief. "What in God's name? I need help," I said, and told him everything. Frank didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then he exhaled sharply and said, "Jesus Christ, Wayne. I knew your son was a weasel, but this is criminal." He asked about my accounts, my property deeds, my will. I told him where the papers were. He told me to scan what I could and email them. I could hear the clatter of his keyboard before we even ended the call. "Give me a day," he said. "I'll draw up something that will make their hair stand on end." I felt lighter after that call, though not much. What lay ahead wouldn't be easy. I was not a rich man, but I wasn't destitute either. And what I did have, this house, my savings, my name, were still mine. They would not be stripped away without a fight. That evening, Michelle texted to confirm they'd be picking me up at noon tomorrow. I wrote back, "I'll be ready." And I would be. Just not in the way they expected. Because I was no one's burden. I was not a name on a chart or a seat in a van. I was not a figure in a spreadsheet or a medical liability. I was Wayne Montgomery, son of William and Rose Montgomery, husband of Eileen for 46 years, father of 2, grandfather of 4, and a man who had once crossed an ocean in uniform to serve a country that now saw him as disposable. If they wanted to cast me aside, they would have to do it the hard way. I would not go gentle into their good night, not when I still had something left to say. The next morning began like a funeral procession. I woke at 5, though I hadn't truly slept. The alarm hadn't gone off. My body had simply given up pretending there was more rest to be had. I rose slowly, the weight of the hours ahead pressing heavily on my joints. I washed, shaved, and dressed deliberately, choosing my charcoal suit, the same one I'd worn to Eileen's funeral. It still hung neatly in the closet, untouched since that day. As I buttoned the shirt and adjusted the collar, I looked into the mirror and barely recognized the man looking back. His shoulders were stooped, the skin under his eyes hollowed out like dry riverbeds. But something fierce burned beneath the weariness, a flame that had no intention of dying quietly. By 7, I had packed a small duffel bag, not the one Michelle had prepared, but my own, filled with the things I refused to let be left behind. Eileen's letters, a copy of our wedding photo, a little music box that used to sit on her vanity, and my father's pocket watch, long since broken but still heavy with memory. I also tucked in my notepad, a list of phone numbers, my bank records, and the notarized draft Frank had emailed me at 3 in the morning. A revocation of all prior power of attorney documents and a temporary hold placed on the house deed, pending a reassessment of my legal standing. Frank wasn't just acting fast, he was furious. At precisely 11:52 a.m., Brett's silver SUV pulled into the driveway, snow crunching beneath the tires. I watched from the living room window as Michelle climbed out on the passenger side, dressed in a bright red coat and a hat too young for her age. She looked up at the house and sighed, visibly annoyed before forcing a smile. Brett stayed in the car, engine idling. Neither of them looked particularly somber, nor did they seem to expect resistance. That was their mistake. I opened the door before she could knock. "Right on time," I said. She gave me that brittle, rehearsed expression she reserved for clients and awkward acquaintances. "Hi, Dad. Ready to go?" I didn't answer. I stepped aside and let her in, noticing how her eyes scanned the room, not for sentiment, but like a realtor appraising footage. Her nose wrinkled slightly at the smell of old wood and dust, as if the house had already been marked as something to discard. "I brought the papers," she said, pulling a folder from her bag. "They'll just need your signature at the facility." Nothing major, mostly intake forms. Brett honked the horn lightly outside, twice, like I was a teenager running late for prom. Michelle flinched, clearly irritated. I nodded toward the folder. "Leave them on the table. I'll look them over during the drive." She hesitated for a second, probably surprised by my tone. I wasn't meek. I wasn't emotional. I was precise. It unsettled her, but she smiled through it. Of course. We walked toward the car in silence. I locked the front door slowly, slipping the keys into my coat pocket, then patted the lintel twice, a habit I'd developed over decades, one final touch before leaving home. Brett didn't get out to help with my bag. I put it in the trunk myself. The drive began with the usual small talk. Weather, gas prices, something about Michelle's younger daughter winning second place in a school art contest. I nodded occasionally, said little. I watched the city give way to cornfields and windbreaks, watched the trees blur past like chapters in a book I was being forced to close. An hour in, we stopped at a fast food chain off the highway. Brett insisted they grab coffee, though he didn't offer me one. While they were inside, I opened the glove compartment and found a second folder. This one labeled Montgomery Estate. Inside were printouts of bank accounts, health proxies, and a copy of my will. The old version, the one Michelle had drawn up, for me after Eileen died. I took out my phone and snapped pictures of every page. When they returned, Michelle handed me a lukewarm tea, unasked for. I took it with a nod, then asked, "You been planning this long?" She blinked. "Planning what?" "This trip. The facility. The papers. My removal." "Dad, don't be dramatic." She sighed, taking her seat again. "We've just been worried about you. The stairs, the isolation, your memory." "My memory's fine," I replied evenly. "Sharp enough to remember you said you'd never make decisions for me without a conversation, and yet here we are, in the car, with signed forms, with a suitcase I didn't pack." She colored. "We're doing what's best for you." "No," I said. "You're doing what's easiest for you." For the next hour, no one spoke. Brett turned up the radio. Michelle typed furiously on her phone. I closed my eyes and pretended to nap, even as my mind raced. At a rest stop, I excused myself and called Frank. He told me he'd already initiated a temporary freeze on my primary checking account and was preparing a cease and desist letter to be sent to both Michelle and Brett regarding unauthorized financial activity. "You'll be protected," he said. "I'll make damn sure of it." By the time we crossed into Iowa, Michelle was beginning to squirm. She asked me again if I was feeling all right, if maybe I was nervous. I told her no, I was simply quiet. Brett made a joke about how the old man was probably scared of bingo. I didn't laugh. When we arrived at the facility, a beige, sprawling compound on the outskirts of Cedar Rapids, flanked by plowed parking lots and leafless trees, I saw it exactly for what it was. A holding pen. Clean, yes. Well lit. But a cage, nonetheless. They led me in like I was luggage. A nurse greeted us, clipboard in hand. She asked my name as if I didn't know it. She addressed Michelle first, not me. Brett filled out paperwork without once asking what I thought of the place. That was the final straw. I took the clipboard from the nurse, smiled politely, and asked for a moment in private. Michelle looked startled. Brett raised an eyebrow. He's probably just overwhelmed. Michelle told the nurse. In the hallway, I opened my coat and pulled out Frank's paperwork. Legal filings revoking all prior permissions, a notarized copy of my health directive, and a signed letter of intent to remain in full custody of my property and body. I asked the nurse for the facility's administrator. When she returned with a portly, balding man in a sweater vest, I handed him the documents and told him, calmly, that I would not be staying. I explained, clearly and without aggression, that I had not consented to being admitted, that any documents Michelle provided were unauthorized and under dispute, and that I had already contacted legal representation to ensure no further steps were taken. The administrator read the papers, looked confused, and then concerned. Michelle and Brett were called into the office. I remained outside. I heard the raised voices through the walls. Michelle insisted I was confused, that I was not well. Brett said something about early signs of dementia, but I had prepared for this. The administrator asked if I was willing to undergo a cognitive screening on the spot. I agreed. 30 minutes later, after a series of tests, he looked at me with a mixture of admiration and discomfort. "You passed with flying colors, Mr. Montgomery," he said. "I'm sorry about all this. You're free to go." Michelle was pale with rage when I walked past her. Brett was red in the face, jaw clenched. "Where are you going to go?" Michelle hissed, chasing me into the parking lot. "You're 78, Dad. You can't just live alone forever." I turned to her and said, "Then I'll die on my own terms, not locked in a room that smells like bleach, playing checkers with strangers." I walked away without another word. I didn't have a plan yet. But I had my bag, my name, my dignity and my freedom. That was more than enough. And as the snow began to fall again, silently coating the world in white, I felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. I walked for nearly an hour through the quiet outskirts of Cedar Rapids, dragging my duffel bag behind me, the wheels catching on patches of frozen slush. The sun was already beginning its slow descent, casting a pale orange glow over the flat, wind-swept streets. My breath came in short bursts, and the cold settled into my knees like wet cement, but I pressed on. With every step, the absurdity of what had just occurred began to transform into a grim, steady resolve. I had been escorted to a nursing facility under the guise of love, only to be abandoned with forged consent and false concern. Michelle's voice still rang in my ears, her manufactured indignation, her lines rehearsed too well. "We just want what's best for you." But the truth was simpler. They wanted control of my assets, my home, my accounts, my name. And when I didn't relinquish them willingly, they tried to outmaneuver me. Eventually, I found a diner with a neon open sign flickering in the window like a heartbeat. Inside, it was warm and mostly empty, just a few truckers nursing coffees and a waitress wiping down the counter. I sat at a booth near the back and ordered a hot tea, then pulled out my phone and called Frank again. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp, alert. I told him what had happened, every detail. He was silent for a long moment before speaking. "We need to escalate," he said. "I suspected they'd pull something like this, but not so soon. They're trying to get legal guardianship over you, Wayne, probably hoping to use some half-baked evaluation from a nursing administrator or get you to sign something under stress. They already tried. I refused everything." "Good. That gives us time. I'll contact the court clerk in Omaha and file for an emergency injunction preventing any further decisions about your person or estate being made without a hearing. And the house. We'll deal with the property next," he said. "But for now I want you safe. I can book you a hotel near downtown Cedar Rapids under my firm's name. It'll be discreet. Just lay low for a few days." I hesitated. "Frank, they're not going to stop, are they?" "No," he said flatly. They've shown their hand. Now we show ours. I hung up and sat in silence, watching my tea grow cold. I thought about how many times I'd swallowed my doubts, how many times I'd made excuses for Michelle, for Brett, for their absence and their distance. I'd called it busyness. I'd called it adulthood. I'd told myself they loved me in their way. But what had they really done in the last 10 years, besides drift further away and come close only when money was involved? And now that they'd realized I might not live forever, that the inheritance wasn't guaranteed until they had control, they'd made their move. And what hurt them most wasn't the manipulation. It was how easily they had justified it. How quickly they'd transformed a father into a liability. Frank booked the hotel, and I checked in just after nightfall under the name M. Edison, a reference he and I had used since the war. I paid cash for everything else, meals, cab fare, even aspirin, leaving no trail they could follow. The room was small but clean, with a firm bed and a desk by the window. I sat there for a long time, staring out at the city below, my hands still trembling slightly, though whether from cold or fury I couldn't say. The next morning, Frank called again. I spoke to a judge. He said, "We've been granted a temporary restraining order. That means they can't file anything about your competence or finances until we have a hearing, and we'll demand an independent psychological evaluation as part of the process. That will buy us a couple weeks at least." "Good," I said, "because I want to go back to Omaha. I want to see the house." There was a pause. "Wayne, I won't go inside," I said. "I just need to stand on the sidewalk. I need to remember what I'm fighting for." He didn't argue. He understood. He arranged transport, a discreet ride share from a trusted contact, and I returned the next day. I didn't call Michelle. I didn't call Brett. I didn't want words. I just wanted the silence of my own street. When I arrived, snow covered the lawn like a burial shroud. The lights in the windows were off. A wreath hung crookedly on the front door, as if someone had tried to maintain a semblance of cheer but couldn't be bothered to do it properly. My breath fogged the air as I stood there, hands in my coat pockets, looking up at the house Eileen and I had built together. Not brick by brick, but with birthdays and scraped knees and Christmas lights and Sunday dinners. That house was more than timber and tile. It was our life, our sanctuary. And now it was a bargaining chip. I stayed for only 10 minutes. That was enough. Enough to feel the ache. Enough to fuel the fire. Back at the hotel, Frank had more news. He'd secured copies of all joint financial documents between me and Michelle, and it was worse than we thought. Over the past 2 years, she had initiated multiple transfers from a shared account without my explicit permission. Brett had funneled some of those funds into a shell LLC, Midwestern Residential Holdings, likely for real estate laundering. They were playing the long game, and I had interrupted it. "I'll freeze everything," Frank said. "But I want to propose something more aggressive." "I'm listening." "You're still legally co-owner of your house. That means you have the right to initiate a partial sale or force a buyout. If they refuse, it goes to court, and if they can't buy you out, then they're out," I finished. "Exactly. It'll take time. But it'll send a message." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Let them come for me. I was ready now. The storm didn't come all at once. Like all the worst betrayals, it unfolded slowly, with the appearance of civility and the pretense of reconciliation. A week after I returned to Omaha, having re-established myself quietly in a rented apartment near Hanscom Park, I received a letter forwarded through Frank's office. It was handwritten, in Michelle's signature looping cursive, the one I used to see on birthday cards and notes she left on the fridge in high school. The tone was apologetic, contrite, even. She said she regretted how things had spiraled, that she didn't mean for the trip to Iowa to feel like an ambush, that she and Brett had only wanted what was best for everyone, and that maybe, if I was willing, we could meet to talk. She suggested a neutral spot, an upscale cafe in Midtown, and offered to bring copies of all documents so we could clear the air. She ended the letter with the words, "Your daughter always," which struck me as false in a way I couldn't explain, but immediately felt. Frank reviewed the letter before I responded. "She's fishing," he said, trying to read your emotional temperature. "They've realized you're not going quietly, and now they're pivoting to charm." He was right, of course, but I still agreed to the meeting, not because I believed her, but because I needed to look my daughter in the eye and see just how far gone she really was. When I arrived at the cafe, she was already there, seated at a table in the back, wearing a navy blazer and a carefully composed smile. She stood and hugged me lightly, the way someone might embrace a stranger after an awkward introduction. Brett wasn't with her. I noticed a leather folder beside her latte, thick with documents. "Dad," she said, "I'm glad you came. You look well." "I am well," I replied calmly. "More well than I've been in years." She blinked at that, the smile faltering. She wasn't prepared for defiance. "I wanted to clear things up," she began. "I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding. Emotions ran high, and decisions were made quickly, and maybe that wasn't fair to you." "You mean being dropped off like a parcel at a nursing home without discussion?" I asked. She looked away. "We didn't think you'd agree if we asked." "No," I said. "You were right about that." The silence stretched between us. She fiddled with the spoon in her coffee. "Look, I know you've been talking to lawyers, and I get it, you feel cornered. But dragging everything into court, what does that accomplish?" "Justice," I said simply. "And clarity." She leaned in. "Dad, think about this rationally. The house is in all our names, yes, but let's not pretend you really want to live there again. It's too big, too much maintenance. It's not practical for you. Then buy me out," I replied. "You and Brett, you've had access to the accounts. You know what I'm owed." She stiffened. "We can't just come up with that kind of money overnight." "Then sell it," I said. "I've already contacted an agent. The market's good right now." Her lips parted slightly, as if I'd slapped her. "You're actually serious about this?" "I am," I said. "You made your move. Now it's my turn." That was when she dropped the performance. Her tone sharpened, her eyes narrowed. "You're acting like we're enemies, Dad. We're not." "We're your family." "No," I said. "You were my family. But family doesn't isolate, manipulate, or rob. Family doesn't send their father away to make him easier to manage." She exhaled, controlled but furious. "You don't understand what it's like trying to manage everything. Brett and I are drowning. College tuitions, mortgages, work. You sitting in that house clinging to the past wasn't helping anyone." "I wasn't supposed to help anyone," I said. "I was supposed to be your father, not your financier, not your liability." She didn't reply. Instead, she reached for the folder and pulled out a piece of paper. "Then maybe we should talk about this," she said, sliding it across the table. It was a medical document, or at least it claimed to be. A psychological assessment, dated 2 weeks prior, stating that I exhibited signs of early-stage dementia, that I was showing consistent memory lapses, signs of confusion, and impaired executive function. It was unsigned. No letterhead. Just a typed statement with my name and date of birth. I stared at it, then looked up. "Where did you get this?" "A doctor," she said vaguely. "What doctor?" She hesitated. He prefers to stay anonymous for now. I leaned forward. Michelle, this is perjury. Fraud. You're submitting forged medical records to claim I'm incompetent. She raised an eyebrow. It's not forged. It's a preliminary evaluation. Based on what? Observations. From the trip. From how you've been lately? You mean your observations? The ones where I didn't agree with your plan, so now I must be confused? She didn't answer. I folded the paper and handed it back. Try submitting that in court. See what happens. She didn't reach for it. Instead, she picked up her coffee and took a slow sip. This could all go away, Dad. No hearings, no drama. You let things settle. We help manage your affairs, quietly, like a family. No, I said again. I'm not going to disappear to make your life more convenient. She set her cup down a little too hard. Then I guess we're done here. I stood. Yes, I guess we are. As I left, I felt the familiar twist in my gut, not from fear or uncertainty, but from grief. The daughter I'd known was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone who spoke of practicality while gutting the past, who wrapped betrayal in soft language and called it love. Frank wasn't surprised when I told him. They'll try again, he said. She'll use everything, fake records, emotional blackmail, even the grandchildren if it comes to that. Be ready. I am. And I was. Over the next 2 weeks, I took action. With Frank's help, I issued a formal declaration of intent to sell my share of the house, backed by notarized ownership documents and market evaluations. I contacted the real estate agent, a sharp woman named Deirdre, who assessed the property at $610,000, estimating my share at just over $200,000. We sent the offer to Michelle and Brett. Buy me out or prepare for petition sale proceedings. They didn't respond. Instead, I got a call from their lawyer. He was polite, professional, and clearly trying to diffuse. Mr. Montgomery, I'm calling on behalf of your daughter and son-in-law. They've expressed concern about your well-being and the stress of legal proceedings. They'd like to resolve this amicably. Then they should have thought about that before forging medical documents. He cleared his throat. There's no evidence of forgery, only misunderstanding. There's also no legal basis for incompetence, I said. I've already undergone 2 independent evaluations. Both cleared me. He hesitated. I'm not here to argue. I'm here to suggest compromise. Then suggest they vacate the house and list it. I'll relay your message, he said. Click. The next week, I filed the petition in court. Partition sale by judicial order. Deirdre prepared the listing materials. Frank filed additional paperwork, freezing Michelle's access to our joint accounts and challenging recent withdrawals. Meanwhile, Brett attempted to counter by claiming a larger financial stake in the home due to renovations he had supposedly paid for. He submitted receipts for appliances and furniture. But Frank anticipated that too. Every cent I'd contributed was documented, and his renovations turned out to be a new barbecue grill and a subscription to a lawn care service. By now, it had gone beyond property. It had become something else, a war over memory, over dignity, over the right to define the final years of my life. And I wasn't going to lose it. Not to my own children, not like this. The morning of the final court hearing was grey and thick with anticipation, the kind of Nebraska winter day that hangs heavy in the air like a verdict waiting to be read. I didn't wear a suit. I wore what I always wore when something mattered. An old wool coat that had seen 2 decades, polished shoes Eileen once insisted made me look like a senator, and a burgundy scarf she knitted during the winter of '87. I wanted to carry something of her with me, because I knew, whatever happened inside that courtroom, this moment was about more than money or property. It was about the erosion of dignity, and the quiet stand a man sometimes must take when he has nothing left to lose but the shape of his name. Frank met me at the courthouse steps. He looked exhausted but determined, a stack of papers under one arm and his tie already loosened, as if prepared for a fight that would go long and hard. "They'll be here," he said, "with counsel. But we've got the evaluations, the banking records, the deed history, and the fraud letter on standby. Just speak clearly, calmly. Let me do most of the talking." I nodded. There wasn't much else to say. Inside, the air smelled like copy paper and old carpet. A bailiff checked our names, and we were ushered into a modest courtroom. Fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above rows of wooden benches and a raised dais where the judge sat, adjusting her glasses and flipping through the docket. When Michelle and Brett entered, they did so quietly but confidently, each dressed in navy and grey, both avoiding my eyes. Their lawyer, a tall man with a soothing voice and a thin silver laptop, conferred with them briefly before taking a seat beside ours. The judge began promptly. She reviewed the matter: property dispute, co-ownership conflict, competing claims of financial misconduct and medical status. I was asked to stand. I did. I answered the judge's questions clearly. No, I had never consented to permanent placement in a nursing facility. No, I had not signed over power of attorney to either child. Yes, I had funded the down payment on the home, with the agreement I would be a legal co-owner. Yes, I had been subject to an attempted forced relocation. And yes, I had passed all psychological evaluations verifying full cognitive capacity. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't sweat. I felt like stone, a man standing in his own ruins, unwilling to move. Michelle's lawyer countered with politeness veiled in acid. He cited emotional strain and family concern. He presented a statement, unsigned, from a family friend claiming I had shown confusion at church one morning months earlier. He spoke of love and responsibility and aging parents who resisted help. But he had no evidence, no declarations from doctors, no proof of impairment. When the judge asked about the forged medical note, he stammered. When she asked why I had not been consulted about the sale or my removal from the house, he shifted blame toward urgency and protective instinct. Then Michelle was called. She stood slowly, clasping her hands in front of her like a schoolgirl reciting an apology. Her voice was soft, deliberately uncertain. She said she never wanted to hurt me, that she had been terrified by how forgetful I seemed, that I had left the stove on, though she never specified when, that I had fallen behind on bills, though she couldn't name which. She said the Cedar Rapids placement was temporary, that they only wanted me to be safe. The judge interrupted her. "Did you inform your father of this plan prior to departure?" Michelle paused. "We discussed options." "Did you obtain a signed consent form from him regarding long-term care placement?" "No." "Did you attempt to secure a medical or psychiatric evaluation before making financial decisions on his behalf?" "No, Your Honor." The judge looked down at her notes, then at me. "Mr. Montgomery, have you incurred costs as a result of these actions?" "Yes," I said. "Legal fees, travel expenses, emotional distress. And I lost my home. Temporarily, yes, but it's not the same now." She nodded and asked Frank to summarize our request. Forced partition sale, freeze on contested accounts, recognition of elder manipulation as aggravating context. Then she turned to Michelle and Brett. "Do you wish to submit a counteroffer to buy out your father's share at fair market value within 30 days?" Michelle's lips parted, but she looked to Brett. He shook his head. "No, Your Honor." "Then I rule in favor of the petitioner," the judge said. "The house will be sold at market price, proceeds divided accordingly. Any future attempt to override Mr. Montgomery's legal rights will be subject to civil penalties, This court also refers this case to the County Elder Services Division for follow-up. The gavel struck wood. That was it. Michelle collapsed into her chair. Brett stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. I didn't look at them. I stood, shook Frank's hand, and walked out of the courtroom. Outside it had begun to snow, not a blizzard but a slow, steady fall, the kind that muffles sound and brings the world to stillness. I stood under the awning for a while, watching flakes melt against my coat. Frank came up beside me, shivering slightly, then chuckled. They'll have to vacate by February. I'll notify the realtor. Let them have time, I said. They've already lost more than they know. That night, I sat by the window of my apartment, looking out over the street where snow blanketed the cars. I had won, technically. My rights restored, my money protected, the house reclaimed. But what I felt wasn't triumph. It was grief. I hadn't just fought for ownership. I had buried something, some final hope that family, even fractured, could mend. I didn't know if Michelle would ever speak to me again. I didn't know if my grandchildren would ever understand what had happened. But I knew this. I had not let them turn me into an invisible man. I had not allowed myself to disappear quietly into someone else's idea of closure. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt something like peace. It took nearly 4 months for the house to sell. During that time, I didn't go near it. I didn't ask for photos or updates beyond what Deirdre sent in her formal reports. I didn't want to know how Michelle and Brett had packed up their things, or if they'd taken the care to preserve anything of Eileen's, her garden tools, her recipe cards, the little wooden bird she kept on the windowsill. I imagined most of it had been boxed, donated, or discarded without thought. I had let go of the house not because I stopped caring, but because I finally understood that no structure, no address, no fixed point on a map could hold a life once the people who gave it meaning had already erased it from their hearts. I moved into a modest rental cottage in Bellevue, about 20 minutes from Omaha, close to the Veterans Center and walking distance from a park where the trees arched overhead like a cathedral. The cottage was small, just 1 bedroom, a narrow kitchen, a front porch barely wide enough for a rocking chair, but it was mine, and for the first time in years I felt the quiet of my space as comforting rather than accusatory. I filled the shelves with books Eileen had loved, framed our wedding photo above the mantel, and placed her music box beside the bed, where it could whisper her melody back into the room each night before sleep. It was not the life I once imagined for my final years, but it was a life I could inhabit with dignity. In April, I received the final disbursement from the house sale, $213 to $800. Frank called the next morning to confirm the transfer had cleared and that all contested accounts had been secured under my name alone. They didn't challenge it, he said. No appeal. Not even a phone call. I thanked him, though the words felt insufficient. He had not only protected me, he had reminded me that there were still men in the world who didn't see aging as a forfeiture of value. With the money, I did something unexpected. I established a private fund through a local non-profit, naming it after Eileen. The EM, Resilience Grant, provided small, confidential financial support to elderly individuals facing coercion, eviction, or guardianship abuse by family members. It wasn't large-scale. It wouldn't make headlines. But each time the coordinator sent me a note, "We helped a woman in Fremont stay in her apartment this month," or "A veteran in Council Bluffs used the grant to hire his own lawyer," it made the cold bitterness in my chest thaw just a little. Michelle never called. Brett sent a single email, brief, apologetic, vague in the way cowards often are. He said he regretted how things had escalated and hoped I was doing well. I didn't reply. I had nothing left to say to a man who watched his father be discarded like expired food and chose silence over resistance. As for my grandchildren, I occasionally saw glimpses of them on social media, their filtered lives awash of volleyball games, selfies, and TikTok trends. They did not reach out. Perhaps they had been told I was confused or angry, or maybe they simply didn't know how to face someone who no longer fit the image of a doting, passive grandfather. That hurt more than I expected, but I accepted it. You cannot force yourself into someone's heart once they have learned to live without you. I began volunteering at the Veterans Home twice a week, not as a patient or client, but as a reader, bringing in short stories, newspapers, and old war novels to men whose eyes had grown too tired for the page. We shared coffee, laughter, and sometimes tears. They didn't know my story, and I didn't offer it. It was enough to sit beside them, to exist in a space where history was honored instead of edited for convenience. One morning in May, while shelving books in the home's modest library, I met Lorraine. She was 81, sharp as a nail, with a voice like gravel and a habit of humming Patsy Cline under her breath. She had been a nurse in Korea, widowed young, and never remarried. We struck up conversations that became routine, then familiar, then comforting. She never pried. She never asked me what I had lost. She only ever asked what I remembered. One afternoon, as we sat on the bench beneath a willow tree behind the facility, she looked at me and said, "You know, Wayne, some people get broken because they're weak, but others get broken because they're strong for too long." I didn't reply. I simply reached out and held her hand. I don't know if that was the beginning of something, or just a kindness passed between two people who had seen too much, but it reminded me that life doesn't always give you closure in the form you expect. Sometimes redemption isn't reconciliation. Sometimes it's just finding your footing again and choosing not to disappear. I wasn't a perfect father, but I was a present one. I loved deeply, gave freely, and believed too long that love alone could hold a family together. When it couldn't, I didn't become cruel. I became clear, and maybe that clarity was the only gift I had left to give. On my porch now, there's a wind chime that plays the opening notes of Moon River, Eileen's favorite. I sit beside it in the evenings with a blanket over my knees and a cup of chamomile in my hands, listening not just to the music, but to the silence between the notes. And in that silence, I am not forgotten. I am finally free.